Welcome to the next video in the Suggestion App course. This is a complete course where we'll build a .NET 6 Blazor server application with MongoDB from the ground up. There are three things you need to know before we get started. First, this is part of a series, and this isn't the first video in the series. If you're just starting out, you should check out the playlist that's linked in the description to start from the first video in the series. Second, this course is actually a paid course. MongoDB sponsored it so you can put the videos on YouTube for free. Check out the link in the description to sign up for MongoDB Atlas for free to thank them if you haven't already. Third, you can also buy this course on IamTimCorey.com. The link is in the description. Buying this course will get you all the lessons right away, the source code for each lesson, a certificate of completion, offline access, and more. It also helps sponsor more free content. The video will be the same as it is on YouTube, so feel free to watch the free version if you want to. Okay, let's jump into today's video. Note there may be more than one lesson in this video, since some lessons are short. When we first put these pages in, we made a lot of concessions to the fact that we didn't have authentication yet. We kept saying, when we get authentication, we'll change this. When we get authentication, we'll change this. Well, guess what? We have authentication, so it's time to change this. Let's start by right-clicking on our Suggestion App UI and saying Add New Folder. We're going to call this Helpers. And you need to spell it right, not Helper X. Helper with an S. There we go. And we're going to create a helper because of the fact that we have some repeat code. So on initialized async, we're going to do some work. Where did we put the change we just did? Let's go find that change where we wrote some code on the uninitialized. Is it in the create page? Yes, this code right here. That's 3 lines of code we have to put in all of these pages. So let's do this. Instead of having all of this, we can move this into a helper method. Now this is it's starting off with the authentication state provider. So if we come up here and just grab that name, in the helpers folder, right click and say add class. We're going to call it AuthenticationStateProviderHelpers. And this will be a public static class. And we'll make this an extension method class. So public static async task of user model. And we'll say GetUserFromAuth. And let's put this on a new line because it's going to be long. This authentication state provider, we'll call it provider. And we'll also take in user data and call it user data. Because we're not doing dependency injection in here, so we need to bring this in from the caller, wherever the caller is, in this case, all of our different pages. And then I'll put my curly braces afterwards, and we're going to say, well, let's actually just grab the, I forget where I put it. Whoops. I pinned that, don't want it pinned. Create page, I think that's where it was. Yes. Okay, these 3 lines right here, let's just grab these. We're going to copy them, come back over to our helper, we'll paste them in, and we're going to have a return right here. And we'll call this provider. So essentially, we're just moving these 3 lines into an extension method. That's what this is here for. It's going to extend the authentication state provider with a GetUserFromAuth, which what it's going to do is look up a user based upon the object identifier and then get that user from the authentication and return that user object, which means that we can cut down all of our code from what we had, which is that more complex line of code, down to a very simple GetUserFromAuth. So let's come back over to create. We can comment out these 3 lines. We can see them compared to logged in user equals await, auth provider dot GetUserFromAuth, and pass in our user data. That's it. So these 3 lines go away. This because, we can't find this right now because of the fact it's in helpers. So it's in the helpers namespace. Since this is an extension method, I'm going to put this in global usings. Like so. And now everywhere has access to these extension methods, which means that this now becomes the way to get the logged in user. Not all of this. It makes our class initialization a whole lot easier, a whole lot cleaner, and that means we can just repeat this on other pages. So the profile page where we have is to do, no worries. We replace that with this, and we're done. And the admin, auth provider, we don't have auth provider. Well, look at that, we don't have that. So we come back to the top, and we need to grab the inject authentication state provider, auth provider. And that should solve the error problem here. It does. So now we've got a logged in user, the actual logged in user, not the test user we were doing. And admin over here, I'm not sure if we were grabbing we're not grabbing the user here. So we don't need that in here. The index page though, we also aren't grabbing the user, but we're going to need the user. So let's go up here to the top, and we've got the user data. We don't have the auth data. So inject authentication state provider, auth provider. And then let's come down to here, and we're going to need to have a entry for right here, private user model logged in user. And then we'll grab that in the onInitialize async. Just paste in that code again. And again, really simple, just grabs our logged in user for us based upon that helper code. So now we have a number of places where we're grabbing that. We have the profile page, we have the create page. I'm not sure we have any other pages that need it, but let's grab and see if other pages need it. For example, we have the sample data we can ignore, details page. The details page, I don't believe grabs the user. It is not, so we'll leave that alone for now. Let's close all these, and then let's start with the suggestion page, because the suggestion page is going to need some tweaks. That's the index page. It's going to need some tweaks based upon the fact that we have the upvote text. And the upvote text and also the ability to vote itself. We don't have that in place yet. We need to add those things. So let's go ahead and make some modifications here. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to load and verify the user. Let's come down here, and we'll create a private async task. And this is going to load and verify the user information every time. And because we're doing more than just load the user, I'm going to move this down into that method, and we'll call this method. So we're going to await this load and verify user in the onInitialize async. So the first thing we're going to do is load the user. Next, we're going to say if object ID. Actually, I'll get the, we've hit a bit of a snag here, and let's go back and grab the helper code, because we actually have an issue where we don't want to do all of this all at once. So let's come back here and redo this. We're going to paste this in. I'll get rid of this line, and tab this line over. So this is the auth provider. We're going to redo this code, but this time we're going to grab just the object ID. And I'm not sure why this is all messed up with my tabs. There we go. Not sure what's going on there. But anyways, so we're going to just get the object ID, not actually get the user. So if string.is null or white space object ID equals false, meaning you're logged in. And the reason why we're going to do it here this way is because of the fact that you might not be logged in. So we've checked to see if you're logged in by checking your claim type. If you don't have a object identifier claim, then this will be null. So if you're not logged in, that's what's going to happen. This is going to fail and say, nope, you're not even logged in. So therefore, this is going to be false, or I'm sorry, true. It'll be null or white space. Therefore, we're going to skip out of this and do nothing. But if it's not null, then we're going to say logged in user equals await user data dot get user from authentication, pass in the object ID. And if this is null, meaning we don't find a user, so if this returns a null object, we're going to do a null coalescing and say new. So either we're going to have an object from our database for this user, or it's going to return null because it doesn't find somebody. If it doesn't find somebody, then we're going to instantiate this logged in user class. Then what we're going to do is we're going to get a bunch of information. String first name equals auth user auth state.user dot claims dot first or default, and the claim is going to be c.type dot contains given name, and that will be, if we have an object, we're going to get the value of that. So it's going to grab the claim instead of just for object identifier, which is that unique identifier from AD or Active Directory. Instead, we're going to look for the given name, which is your first name. So we'll capture that in the first name variable. We'll do the same thing for the other objects or other items we're going to grab out of our claims. So string, and actually I'm going to copy this because it's going to be easier. This will be last name. And this is going to be, instead of given name, surname. And the next one is going to be display name. And that is going to be equal to type.equals name. And then we have one more, and that's email. First to default contains email. Now, why am I saying contains versus equals? The claims that come back, some of them are very, very clear. For example, job title is very clear. It's job title, one word. It's lowercase job, capital T in job title. But others are a little bit more complex when they come back. And so we can just say, hey, in there, is there a given name? Or in there is a surname. Now, this one has to be equal because of the fact that the entire name of it is called name. Well, there's surname and given name. So if we said contains, we'd get one of the other ones. And since we're doing first or default, that would be a problem. So you can look at the claims. If you were to pause, like you put a breakpoint here, you could look, actually, let's put your breakpoint at 107. you could go and look at the auth.state.user and look at the claims and look at all the ones that come back and see the values. Some are very clear and straightforward. Others are a little bit more messy. But by doing the inspection, I found these are the values I need in order to get the first name, last name, display name, and email address. Now, I'm going to say bool is dirty equals false. This is a variable I'm going to track to the is dirty means have we changed our object? And that by object, I mean the logged in user. And the reason why is because when you log in, you're going to hit the main page. And when you do, we're going to grab the claim from you or the set of claims from you. And we're going to check your first name, last name, display name, and email address. And we're going to say, hey, have any of these changed? And the first time you log in, we're going to check our user data and find there is no object. So we're going to create a new instance of logged in user. We're going to fill in first name, last name, display name, and email address. And then we're going to save that entry along with the object ID. We're going to save that entry into our database because right now our database doesn't have entries for everybody. So for our users, we have one user, and that is our tim@test.com sample, which isn't really right because I've already logged in as help@imtimcorey.com. So we haven't created a user for that person yet. This system will create that user. The isDirty is going to track if you've already created the user, so it found the user, and then we get the first name, last name, display name, and email address. We're going to compare that against what we know those values were, and if any of them have changed, we'll say, yep, this is a dirty entry, meaning we're going to update the entry and save it back to the database. If they're all the same, we're not going to save it to the database again. We don't need to have extra rights every time you log into the page. So if object ID dot equals logged in user dot object identifier equals false. So if for whatever reason the object ID does not match the object identifier in the logged in user, which would only happen if you have a new here. But if that's the case, isDirty equals true and logged in user dot object identifier equals object ID. And this is the pattern we're going to follow for all of the rest of these. So let's just copy and we'll paste this. Let's just paste it a number of times. So this is first name, last name, email address, and display name, the ones we need. So the first one is first name. So if first name equals first name, then let's copy and paste this here and like so. So if the first name does not equal the first name of the logged in user, then we're going to assign the new value into the object and say it's dirty. Now notice we can set the isDirty to true multiple times. We never set it back to false. So this is last name and last name. And then this is our display name. And then this is our email. And our email address, like so. So now we have our comparisons for all of these strings we found. And we've set the isDirty to true if we go in and change any of the values. Now that we're done this, we can come down here at the bottom and say if isDirty. So if you've change the value in some way, if string.is null or white space on logged in user.id, meaning we don't have an identifier from MongoDB. So if up here we said new instance of logged in user, the ID value is never changed. The object identifier value is changed, but never the ID value. So we can check that to see, hey, does that exist? If it does exist, that means you got it from MongoDB, which means it's an update. But if it's null, then this is a new user. So await user data dot create user logged in user. Else await user data dot update user logged in user. So either way, if it's dirty, we're going to the database and giving this information up. But if it's the first time that user's logged in, it's a create. If the user has changed something, it's an update. So with this, let's just see this in action because I think it'll be clear here. Remember, we only have one entry for users. Let's log in, or let's run the application. That's the first step. Wait for it to load, and if we're already logged in, we're going to, I think we are, so let's refresh to make sure it didn't do, hey, it did something. Since we hit the page, even though we're already logged in, that page is going to check the user. And since it checked the user, it said, hey, Tim Corey test, the help at I am Tim Corey, needs to have an object. Now notice the display name is Tim Corey test, the first name is Tim, last name is Corey. Let's make a change. We go to Profile, edit my profile, wait for the page to load. How about Timothy? That's technically my name. I don't use it very often. So now I've made a change to my profile. Let's go back here. We'll hit refresh. And notice first name is now Timothy. Because we came back to this page and I said, hey, there has been a change and we're going to update your entry with that new change. So this will track for us and create users every time you log in. It's going to check to see if your user account has changed in any way. If it has, or if you're a new user, it's going to create an entry or update the database with that information. And now we'll have a record to associate with anything you create. So that's the process for working on the main page. We do have something else to change though on the main page, and that is this is the big one. Okay, the load and verify user. But we also have the VoteUp. Okay, so we have VoteUp, we have GetUpvoteText. Let's change to GetUpvoteText first. So right now we have this else statement here that says click to. So if there's no votes, it says click to upvote. But if you're logged in, let's close out our little error message here. If you're logged in, you shouldn't see click to on your suggestions. And that's because of the fact that you don't get a chance to upvote your own suggestions. So let's do a little tweak here. We're going to cut this out and we're going to say if suggestion.author.id equals logged in user, if there is one, .id, then return awaiting. Otherwise, return click to. So now if it's your suggestion, then instead of saying click to upvote, it's going to say awaiting upvote. So it's just telling you, hey, yeah, you're waiting some upvotes. That's the big tweak there. So that's one change we're going to make. The other change we're going to make, though, is we're going to have a new method. I don't think we included the method yet. So we're going to have a new method called private async task VoteUp. suggestion model suggestion. So if you want to vote on something, which we have not enabled yet, but if you want to vote on something, then you need to be logged in. So if logged in user is not null. Okay, so if you're logged in, then sure. But we're gonna have an else here. Let's fill this else in first, which is navmanager.navigate2/Microsoft identity/account/sign in. And we're going to have at the end of this force load, true. Okay, normally we don't use that. But what this is going to do is if you click to upvote something and you're not logged in, it's going to take you right to the login page, which kind of makes sense. I mean, if you're trying to do something that you're not allowed to do, then we're going to ask you to sign in so you can do it. Now, this force load here is because of the fact that this isn't actually a Blazor page, it's outside that. And so this force load ensures that the page fully reloads and goes to this URL, which takes us to that external login page. Now, if you are logged in, we're going to check first to see if you can vote. If suggestion.author.id equals logged in user.id. Now, you don't have to have the question mark here because we know that the logged in user is not null. Therefore, we know that this is going to be present. So let's put a code note here. Can't vote on your own suggestion. Return. So if you click on your own suggestion to upvote it, nothing's going to happen. You won't see this message or anything. This is just for us. But it's just not going to happen. Nothing's going to happen. Okay. If. I know there's two different ifs here. I prefer this one because it's a snippet, which will give me the parens and the curly braces and all the rest. So suggestion.uservotes.add logged in user.id equals false. Okay, remember that user votes is a hash set. So when we say add this ID, so if you click on something to upvote it, then we're going to check to see if you can add it. This add returns a Boolean value of either true or false. True means yes, it worked. False, which is what we're checking for, means that we need to do a suggestion.uservotes.remove logged in user.id. So since it failed to add, that means it's already in the list. Since it's already in the list, we're going to remove it from the list because when you click on something a second time, the first time upvotes it, the second time removes your upvote. That way you have the opportunity to rescind your endorsement. Now this is going to happen all on the list element or the item that's loaded locally. It's not happening yet in the database. This is just locally. Now we say await suggestion data dot upvote suggestion.id and logged in user.id. Now this is going to do the work of actually upvoting the suggestion. So why do we make this change to the suggestion itself? Well, because this way it will show up visually for the user without having to reload the page and reload the cache and all the rest. So this is a way to quickly show them an action has happened, and it even happens before we do any asynchronous call to our database. Therefore, it will look instantaneous even if this is still doing work in the background after they think it's done. Now, once we have upvoted a suggestion, we're going to say if is sorted by new. Remember that filter? we're going to check that filter for which way we're sorting. If we're sorting by new, that's not a problem, because that's not going to change the order based upon the number of votes. But remember, the other alternative is popularity. Well, if we're sorting by popularity, then, which is sorted by new equals false, then if we vote on something, that may change its popularity. Let's say we have no votes on anything. We click on one halfway down the list and upvote it. Well, that's going to make it the most popular now because it has one vote, so it should move to the top. Now, we could do the whole sort thing, which calls the database and all the rest, but it's much easier just to say suggestions equals suggestions plural equals suggestions dot order by descending s dot user votes dot count. And I believe I also had another entry here. Let me check the filter here to be sure. So we have, let's collapse this down. There's a lot of code in here. Load filter state. Nope, that's not it. Oh, filter suggestions right here. So at the end, we have the sorted by new is false. We have the then. Let's grab that then. Come down here and paste it in. So that way we match the ordering. But this way it's going to order by the user votes descending and then by the date created, just like our filter would have redone, but this way we're not going out to the database. Again, this is a concession to the idea that a database call can be expensive. So instead of always doing it, we're going to do a little bit of cheating behind the scenes to give the user the sense that things have changed and to update their data to match what they'd expect from the database. But we're not always going to go to the database to get the information we already know. So that's what's happening here and why we're doing it this way. So this VoteUp, where is that going to go? Well, that's going to go, let's just grab this VoteUp so we don't type it wrong like upvote or something like that. But at the very top, we have this section right here, which has the UpvoteTopText, the UpvoteBottomText, and that caret. Well, the div itself, the outside div, is going to have an onClick. And we're going to have our open and close parens twice, our arrow, and then vote up and pass in that S, which is the suggestion. So that is going to allow us to vote on entries. Let's run this and test it. Make sure it compiles first, always a good thing. Wait for it. There we go. Okay, so now we have, let's sort by popular. We have a number of entries that don't have any votes. It says click to upvote, click to upvote, click to upvote. Let's grab the bottom one, which is our first suggestion, and click the little up arrow. Notice it says 1, but we do have an unhandled exception. Let's find out what that is. We'll hit F12 and look at our console. Cannot send data if the connection is not in the connected state. It looks like we have a connection issue. So connection disconnected. Interesting. Oh, there you go. There's our errors. The error right here is MongoDB driver, a write operation resulted in error. After applying the update, the immutable field ID was found to have been altered. Whoops, that's not a good thing. So that's a problem because you can't update this ID field because of the fact that that ID field is not something that should change. It should always be the same. Now, where we do that, I don't remember actually doing that. So let's go back to the code and find out where we're making a change to that value. So let's hunt down the error. Let's start by looking at the most obvious place, which is the suggestion data, we have the upvote. So upvote suggestion right here. We're grabbing the client. We're starting the transaction. We are checking to see, we're grabbing a suggestion, okay, and basing that off the suggestion ID. We are adding that user ID to the upvote list. And same logic, if the upvote is false, then remove it from the list. And then we're doing a replace one based upon the suggestion ID. That looks right. And then we're going to the user and get the user based upon the author's ID. And if it's an upvote, then we say VoteOnSuggestion.add and that suggestion. Otherwise, we set the remove that item based upon the match of the ID. Okay, so that looks right. So let's see, replace one there. We're basing it off of the match of the ID, and we're passing in the user model. It all looks correct. So what we can do is we can put a breakpoint in here. Let's run it again, and let's try it. Now, first we verify that, yes, we're logged in. Cool. And then we come down here, and we do have a vote on this, which is interesting. In fact, if we go over to our compass, and we look at the users, let's refresh the users, and I'm going to open up the voted on suggestion. There's no voted on suggestion for help at I am Tim Corey. There's no vote on for tim@test.com either. But if we go to suggestions and look at our first suggestion, user votes, it does have an entry and it ends in 4F0. So let's go over to users and see if it ends in 4F0. So that is a match. So the issue seems to be with the updating the user ID or the user element. So we got the breakpoint in. Let's upvote a second suggestion. And let's just start skipping over things and see if we have an exception somewhere. We should have caught the exception in this, but remember, we're throwing it again if we have to roll back the transaction, which is interesting because if we had to roll back the transaction, we should have aborted the transaction, not committed it. So I'm not quite sure why we are having the half data in here. We don't want that for sure. Okay, get the suggestion. We can check the suggestion and see that it's a little small, but it does find the suggestion. This is our second suggestion. So it knows all that good information. We can check to see if it's a upvote, and it is an upvote, so that's true. And then let's replace one asynchronously. All right, so that replace seems to have worked. Let's grab the user. And the user is an actual user object. It's tim@test.com. That's interesting because it shouldn't be. It should be. It should not be tim@test.com. It should be something else. It should be the help I am Tim Corey. So that's a problem. We've got a problem where we are passing in the wrong ID. So it says 4F0. If we come back over here and look, sure enough, 4F0 is correct. So we have a problem in our user lookup, GetUser, based upon the author ID, which the author ID seems like it should be correct. Oh. Well, that seems like a problem because we're passing in the ID, the user ID, but we're not using it. We should be using the user ID right here instead of a get user off of the suggestions ID, like the suggestions author ID. We don't care about the author ID. We care about who I am, the person that's logged in. But let's keep going because worst case, it says that the wrong person voted on it, right? It's a bug. We need to fix it, but not the end of the world yet. So let's now look if this is an upvote. It is. Then we're going to add user, which is the test user, voted on suggestions, add, we're going to pass in the suggestion for our second suggestion. Okay, that seems to have worked. Now we're going to replace one throughout users in transaction, replace one asynchronously. Oh, I see the problem. So we're doing a full replace on the user. And we're saying, hey, the user ID is going to match the 4F0. That's the real user ID. And we're passing in the test user instead. There's our problem. So let's just see what happens. If we try to do this, it's going to throw an exception. Cool. And we're going to abort the transaction. And we're going to throw the exception after that. So the session should be properly aborted, which means it should roll back what we've done. All right. And that should throw the exception and things should break. And I think I found it. And that's, we forgot to add one thing that's really important for our actions. Whenever we do an action where we're going to make a modification to the database that we want to roll back, we need to pass in the session first. So that's the client session that we can then roll back with. So both of these need to have a session passed into it. Kind of a big oversight. Let's make sure this works. And then once it does, we'll go look at the other places where we use sessions and make sure that we pass them in there too. So we know that this does not work, which is a good thing. We can test it. So let's go back and run this page again. And we know that, whoops, that wasn't the right page. Wait for it to load. There we go. You can minimize that. We know that it doesn't work. So let's find something else we've not voted on. So we've not voted on this upvotes right here, our fifth suggestion. So let's click on this. It should change. Right now it says 4. And if we go look at the fifth suggestion, let's scroll down here. And the fifth suggestion is right here. And we see user upvotes. It has 4 of them, and they're 1, 2, 3, and 4. So let's click on this. Let's bypass our breakpoint and just hit continue. We get an unhandled exception, no problem. We come back over here and we refresh the data and we look at, again, the fifth suggestion, and we still only have 1 through 4. So that has properly rolled back our transaction. Excellent. That's what we want to see. So now let's go to the other places where we are using transactions. So we'll just do this. I will do a Control F and I'll say in the entire solution, look for start session async. And here's where we're doing create suggestion. So let's make sure that wherever we're doing the gets don't matter, but the replace one does, pass in the session there, and also the insert one async does. So make sure you do that. And I'll go back and see if there's anything else. There's just those two. Those are the two places where we use transactions. Now they're both updated to use the proper session for their transaction. So with that, we now have this updated, but we still have the problem of this right here. We had changed this to be user ID. So that's a get user for the user ID, not for the author's the author ID. So with that in place, let's try this again. And this time, we're going to vote on that top one again, number 5, give it an extra vote. So click to upvote. Nope. We want the 5th suggestion. We're going to click on this. It now says 5 and no error. Let's go to our 5th suggestion. We'll hit refresh. We'll zoom in here, look at the user votes. And now the 5th entry is that 4F0, which is correct. That's us. So we have a little bit of bad data in here, no big deal. But otherwise, we're good to go. We can actually click on this. We have an unhandled exception. Don't worry about that. We can refresh the page. The unhandled exception probably was because we're trying to do a remove here. Let's make sure. Cannot send data if the connection is connected state. That's just the previous or the error after you have an exception. Sequence contains no elements. Yep. So that's just our bad data. And don't try and fix errors that come from bad data. That's not something you want to chase down the rabbit hole. Let's just refresh the page. We know we voted on this one right here. Let's click it again. It changed to 4. Now it changes to 5, 4, 5. So it works. It's just the half-formed data we did. That's what caused our exceptions. So with that, we now have the upvote working on the main page. Let's close out of this, and we now have this VoteUp working. But this isn't the only place where we do the VoteUp. We also have the details page. So on the suggestion detail page, we have the ability to vote up as well, and it's the same basic code. So let's grab the vote up down here. Let's minimize the things that we're not using, so we're not scrolling too far, and vote up. There we go. We can copy this, and we can come over to details. We can come down here. We're going to modify this, so let's leave it open. But after the bottom text, we'll paste in vote up. See if we have any errors. We don't need to pass in suggestions because we're on the detail page. And we haven't yet checked to see if they're logged in. So we need to do that. So let's first see if we have enough information. We don't. We need to have a couple more pieces of data. Let's go to the index pages top, and we'll grab the authentication state provider. We need that. And we also need the user data. Let's grab that. And then we can come back over here. Sorry for the lots of scrolling here, but we got lots of stuff to cover. The private user model logged in user, we're going to put that in our code. So let's put that right here. And then we can say the logged in user equals auth provider dot, was it get from auth, and it was user data we pass in, but we have to await this because this is an asynchronous method, and this returns our user model and populates it, which means that down here we can grab the user information and upvote the suggestion. Now we don't need to do the sorting. We can get rid of that. So now we have this vote up method. We can actually apply this to our onClick right here, which is the same as, again, I'm going to scroll, which is the same as right here. And since it's similar, or actually the same, we'll just paste it in. And there's the same logic. Again, we don't need to pass in the suggestion, which means we could also just say vote up, because we're not passing in any parameters, because we know what suggestion it is. There's only one on the page. All right. So now down here in the GetUpvoteTopText, we can modify this as well. And again, it's the same stuff. So let's go back down and look for the GetVoteUp. There we go. And we're going to do this check right here. So instead of click to, we'll check to see if it's awaiting or click to based upon the logged in status. And that's all of the modifications we need to do for the fact that we're logged in. I don't think of anything else, but we do have some more admin type stuff where right now we have no code for allowing the admin to archive something or to add a state to the or status to the suggestion. So things like completed or watching, those kind of statuses. We don't have that yet. We're going to get there once we get through the styling of the application, and then we'll start in on adding the entries for administrative tasks. But for now, our application has been roughed in. We have all of the structure of our pages in place. We have the authentication in place and the idea that we can go from page to page to page correctly. But now we have to solve the problem of this thing is ugly. So what we're going to do next is we're going to start working on our styling of the various pages to make them look good. Because right now, this is not a usable site. It's just too ugly. But once we make it pretty, we make some changes to it, we can make this into a website that is something you want to use. All right, and that's what style does for us. Style can go a long way in making a website go from no one wants to use it to this is awesome, I can't wait to use it every day. So that's next in our course.